I'm Whitney Dangerfield, a publications director here. Thank you all so much for coming. I'm going to introduce our panelists. So we have Lindsay Krause right here as a producer, editor, and writer at the New York Times. She served as co-executive producer of OpDocs, where she produced nearly 400 short films. She also produced the first Oscar winner for the Times, 2021's The Queen of Basketball. She now works in a different part of Opinion Video, which we'll talk about. And she's written extensively for the Times and is working on a book, and way back when we worked together. Melissa Fajardo is a filmmaker, producer, and journalist. She directs and produces for the New Yorker documentary series. 5 New Yorker films have received Academy Award nominations just this year. Is that right? Am I right? Yes. Okay. I think I'm right. Previously, she worked on Vox Media's Netflix series Explained and Through Our Eyes for Now This. And then Opal Bennett, who is here on our screen behind and also behind us here, is the Emmy-winning executive producer of POV Shorts and senior producer at POV. POV Shorts won the 2020 and 2022 IDA Award for Best Short Form Series. POV Shorts is currently in its 6th season. Previously, Opal worked at Doc NYC. She's also worked at Athena Film Festival, Nantucket Film Festival, Aspen Shorts Fest, Tribeca Film Festival, and more. And as you can see, professors are coming on stage to talk to her before the panel, just because they're so excited that she's here. And Opal, you're in.
This is my alma mater, so.
Yeah, and where are you in the country right now?
I'm in Georgia, about 45 minutes east of Atlanta.
Okay. So we'll have a discussion up here for a bit, then we'll open it up to questions. So I just read your bios, but I feel like everyone has a story of how you ended up in your position that's involves some serendipity and some zigzagging, and I can't believe this is where I ended up, but it's great. And so I wondered if you could tell us just sort of your story of how you got into the position you're in now. Do you want to go, Melissa?
Yeah, sure. I got into journalism, I think at like a very young age. I grew up in Mexico, in Tijuana, in the border with San Diego. And I got the huge privilege to cross the border every single day to go from Mexico very early in the morning, like 5 a.m., and cross to the US, which was a huge eye-opening experience, like 2 places in the same day, every single day. And what I was living and breathing in Mexico, and the stories from my family, from the community in Mexico, was being heard and told, basically, in my school, in the other side, in the public school. So I got into storytelling, and I found ways to like tell them stories and convince them that like Tijuana's not dangerous, and like they can come to my party in my house in Tijuana. And so I really was in love with the art of what storytelling can do if you kind of just put together a story arc and, tell it to someone. And I knew I wanted to do audiovisual. I graduated at the cusp of like digital video, and I was like very close to getting this job at NBC, which was my dream. I thought I wanted more, a bigger newsroom. And then I started at this scrappy little newsroom in Soho called Now This. At the time, we had like 20 young people, producing news. And I just felt like, it was a big opportunity to like create the voice of a new company, and it was a great decision. I got to experiment with very little money to do short documentaries there, and started their original section division of short documentaries at Now This. And then, I got bit by the documentary bug. Like when I was there, I loved it so much, and how much depth you can really tell in the short documentary space without asking people for an hour commitment on your phone or in digital. And then I I pitched a series to HBO. I piloted that series with them. I loved the experience. So that led me to Netflix Explained, and then to The New Yorker, because Explained was an amazing experience, and the people at Vox are geniuses at the explainer, but I think I gravitate more towards the human aspect and experimenting outside of format. And that's when I found The New Yorker, like I think 3 years ago, in that small team, and it's been such a great pleasure to be there.
You started during the pandemic then.
I did. Yes, I did. Yeah.
Opal, what about you? The story of where you are, how you got here.
Yeah, this is, and by the way, I just want to give kudos to both of these ladies and their teams up here. It's a real honor to be doing the work that I do in short form alongside what OpDocs and the New Yorker teams do. They've just really been spearheading the industry. So I just want to say that. This is actually my second act. I was a trained and practicing attorney before I came into the film space, and it was something akin to a calling. It might sound a little like too new agey for folks, but honestly, like I remember being in my legal practice, which was fine. It was the culmination of my immigrant parents' dream for their daughter to get this professional degree and move into this space, but it was not really my dream. And I remember sitting maybe 2 years into practicing at a Wall Street firm and being like, man, if I stay here much longer, like I'm gonna lose what it is that I need to have to move in the space that I'm supposed to be in. And it was a bit of a protracted journey from that. I remember that afternoon having lunch with some friends into this space, and folks always ask me, how did you do it from law to film? And I say very intentionally. And I was doing like legal sort of casework. I wasn't working for a firm, but was working on behalf of firms, being hired by an agency that hired lawyers. So I was able to have a bit more control over my schedule. I could work for like 3 months and then take a little bit of time, or work for 9 months and take a little bit of time. And during that period, I was able to start screening for film festivals. Tribeca Film Festival was the first fest I started screening for, and then also attending festivals as a quasi-journalist, right? Journalism, those are the two professors you just saw coming up on stage to say hello. That was my major at NYU. And so I was like, let me just start writing about film, right? So I could get these press passes. And so I was screening, but I was also getting P&I passes, press and industry passes to go to festivals where the programmers who I was screening for were in, the same lines. And so it was me being able to be in the same place as they were, while giving them access to, my taste, basically, right? I was screening a lot of films for them, so they knew they could rely on me as a screener, and then lo and behold, I'd be in line with them at Sundance or Tribeca or TIFF, to go and see the films. And so it was a really fertile networking time for me. And so I got my first full-time film position at Montclair Film Festival. Shout out Montclair, Tom Hall over there. Really great fest in New Jersey. And then I got a consultancy at the March on Washington Film Festival at DC, and I still work for them, actually. It's the only job that I've held on to since joining American Documentary. And yeah, I was able to negotiate a year-round contract with the March on Washington Festival, which is not typically what you get in the space, in the festival space. The contract covered my rent. And then I just was like off to the races to make sure that I could fill a portfolio of work each year to be able to fulfill, my financial needs and obligations. And by, let's say like 2018, 2019, I'd, really been able to amass a pretty strong portfolio that allowed me to cover all of my expenses, but also gave me a lot of connects in the space. And I was at Doc NYC, Athena, March on Washington, of course, and an Aspen Shorts Fest that year, I'll remember. And I applied for the role to help launch POV Shorts, and my predecessor, Chloe Bai, got it, and she was there for about a year and a half. And it's always timing, right? Because when she left to go head up If Then, they reached back out to me, and the timing aligned. And so this was the end of 2019, and I joined at the beginning of 2020, and was, of course, right in office for a few weeks before the world stopped, and we went into the pandemic and everything. And And so I was initially hired part-time just to head up POV Shorts. So I kept Athena and DocMIC, and then within a year I was promoted full-time to co-produce the main series as well as head up POV Shorts. And yeah, that was the trajectory.
I love that you started out in law school and then you're like, nope, this is not where I should be. That's a big zag, and I love it. Lindsay, what about you?
Yeah, so similar to what Opal said, I feel like my career has also been kind of like taking opportunities as they arise. Like I don't think, really since I graduated from college more than 15 years ago at this point, that I've really like applied to a job. I've just sort of I've just sort of risen, I guess, but without kind of like knowing exactly what I was doing and just kind of being extremely opportunistic. So I moved to New York and saw a Craigslist ad, and I just really knew I wanted to be a writer. The Craigslist ad that I applied to turned out to be a New York Times reporter. He didn't say anything about that. He was just looking for somebody who knew about international relations, was interested in sports, and knew a little bit about like refugee resettlement. And I was a history major in college. I'm pretty sure nobody else even emailed him. And he wound up hiring me and just gave me like a little bit of money every once in a while. And I started working for him while obviously got like my other regular jobs where I was actually supporting myself. And then from there, because he knew a lot of people at the New York Times, and he had a really great literary agent in the city, the next time, and basically because anytime he needed anything, I would drop everything and just start like transcribing what he needed, or getting him some research or whatever, like on nights and weekends. He then connected me with another person who was writing a book, and then another person who was writing a book, and then they connected me to another person, and then they connected me to, and for each of them I started, helping them as a research assistant on my nights and on weekends, supporting myself again through like I had a job in global health that I loved, but I really wanted to be like these people. And what was interesting about that for me was that I needed the money. It was not insignificant. Working in this field, as you all know, it can really take a while to feel, if you ever feel like you're, fully supporting yourself. But so that money really helped, and it also kept me doing it. And after a while, one of the people that I got connected to was Jodi Kantor, and she was writing a book on the Obamas, and I, again, like nights, weekends, like got her research on whatever she needed for that book. Then it turned out that at the New York Times, there were these assistant jobs that they didn't post at the time. They didn't post publicly, and I'd worked for all these people, and I never even heard about these jobs. But one of them wound up, but then Jodi kind of put me in the running for one of them. I didn't get the first one, so kind of like what Opal was saying, like, you come back, and then I got the second one. And from there, but that was a really tricky job at the Times. I was like, okay, I'm in this arena, but I don't know what to do next. And Whitney and I were just talking about this, like these jobs, they were like, it was great to be in the room, but I wasn't allowed to write, I wasn't allowed to report, but I did sit behind this guy named Jason Spingarn-Koff, who had just started this new thing called OpDocs. And he was all by himself and like looking to curate documentaries, and he didn't know what it was, but he did know that if he didn't start to do well at it, it would probably not exist for a little while. And so after a while, so I just sat behind him and I was like, I'll do whatever you want. Again, like nights and weekends, I had a full-time job as a columnist assistant. And that was kind of how I wound up inadvertently getting my start. In documentary. Was I just did literally anything he wanted at any point, and I loved it. And he needed so much help that it was like story shaping, fact checking, production, and then getting to meet people like you all the time. Like he could only be in one place at any given point. And after a while, the columnist that I was working for moved on from the Times, and I had a job, and it was moving up within OpDocs. And so I rose and rose and rose and kept working on that team, and again, just loved it. But at the same time, I was also a distance runner. I just had a baby, but usually I'm a pretty competitive marathon runner, and I realized at the New York Times there weren't a lot of women there writing for the sports desk. But meanwhile, I was an athlete, and all my friends were athletes, and so I just kind of raised my hand and started shipping in articles, and they'd wind up on the front page and be really widely read. And I realized like there was again nobody wanted a women's sports reporter necessarily, but if the pieces did well, they'd keep asking for more, and it would be, another really great way to kind of contribute things that interested me, and also that nobody else was doing. And so from there, at some point, like I started to almost have like two jobs. I became like the women's sports, almost like endurance sports person at the Times. And I was producing these documentaries on all different things. And then at some point we created this OpDocs. I don't know how well you guys know sort of like what OpDocs is, but within OpDocs, the New York Times created this like New York Times opinion video desk. And suddenly it was like this amazing opportunity where I was like, okay, I can combine my interest in sports and my interest in video and my interest in documentary. And I started taking some of the articles that I'd reported before for the sports desk, like for example, stories about like female distance runners and like sponsored by, like Nike, for example, and looking at what it was actually, like they'd all told me like what their real stories were when I was reporting more the kind of like rah-rah, isn't this wonderful and inspiring and empowering that they can do this. They'd also told me the truth. And so working with the Opinion Video Desk, I teamed up with some athletes that I'd spoken with before, like Alicia Montano, who was a an Olympian and an amazing distance runner, and then Allison Felix, who now is the winningest track, I'm gonna botch her exact accolades, but one of the winningest female athletes of track and field athletes of all time in America. I was able to kind of take those stories, produce them through an opinion video, and do what the Times really cares about most, which is impact. And we wound up getting Nike and therefore that entire ecosystem to start supporting female athletes as they had children as well, as opposed to just kind of putting them in ads, but actually paying them and ensuring that they'd be supported and that they could come back. So that was really fun. From there, we got to, and really meaningful and important, from there, produced stories with other athletes where we wound up showing that I think in November, right when Trump was being impeached, I produced a video with this young woman named Mary Kane who had, she was the fastest girl in America and had a really difficult time at Nike from there, kind of faded away from the scene, and produced a video with her that kind of showed what actually happened to her. And that was the most widely viewed asset on the New York Times for that entire month, like again, in a crazy election year. So it just it was like kind of making the case for the things that interested me the whole time. Making the case for why the Times should be investing more in them, like kind of as I was doing them. Then I got this, then I started writing this book about quitting, which again is a little bit about like writing about second acts and kind of how to let go of things that are no longer serving us and build new lives that are more true to however our interests evolve. And I've been doing that. So I was on leave for 6 months and then wrote this book for 6 months. I've been on leave from the Times for a year, and now I came back and I'm a producer, just an opinion video, taking on content from contributors on basically kind of telling me like what we should be doing next, like who should we be covering, what should we be doing with them, and yeah, just sort of where should the Times be taking its video report from here.
Thank you. I love that there is a lot of I've knew Lindsay when she first came to the Times, and I didn't know any of that stuff about you working freelance with reporters. So I've seen how your career has sort of done all of this, and it's like I know that all of us that have that sort of that struggle or that journey, I guess. So I want to talk about like what you're all looking for, but I'm just wondering like what is it, because I find that with students, with text editors or audio editors, anybody, like it's interesting to hear what your day is like. So what are you juggling in any given day? Like meetings, your travel, you're going to festivals, like how much are you looking for new work versus working on current projects? So I think it's helpful to know. I know sometimes whenever you're pitching a text, text article, you're kind of like pitch it and then you're like check mail, like from the pitchers, the person who's pitching it from that point of view. But I'm like, the editor has like so much going on, and a producer has so much going on. So can you just talk about that a little bit? Do you want to go first, Melissa?
Yeah, sure. Oh my gosh, I always joke with my teams like, you guys need to go to the restroom. I'm gonna come back and have like 25 more emails about this film we're publishing tomorrow, so I'm ready. So I think my job, the New Yorker documentary, for those of you guys who may not be familiar with it, we're a year-round series, which means we publish one documentary short every week, every Wednesday, and then we have two series. We have our documentaries and then our screening room series. I oversee more of our documentary, but the screening room is just like a lovely news break. It's narrative shorts. It's very different. It doesn't go through like the fact checking or everything that a documentary goes through, The New Yorker. So every single of our doc films, and I'm interested actually how it works with everybody here, but it goes through our fact-checking department, our legal department, our copy editors, the New Yorker's almost 100-year-old style guide. If you have a subtitled film of 30 minutes, you bet it has to fit the New Yorker style guide. And so either our amazing associate producer is, QCing, I do a last check while you're preparing for a contract of a beautiful film that is for 2025 probably, you know what I mean? So you're kind of like working a little bit of everything. We do a lot of reviewing, so I assign screenings, or when wonderful people email me a screening, we have a very democratic progress within our team. We really see every single film, like no film is overlooked, but we're a small team of 5. So it's a mix of, during lunch, I screen a couple of films when I can. In the morning, it's just ensuring that week's publication is all set, that it's QC'd, that it's going to be out in the world perfect. I really just collaborate with the whole newsroom. I meet with our social media team to ensure the amplification. Again, monitoring the news cycle. Obviously, right now it's so difficult, and we just want to be very, sensitive to the issue and our cadence and our documentary cadence. Oversee what our headlines or descriptions, talk with YouTube, audience development team. So it's like a little bit of everything to really make a publication happen. And every film comes out with an article written by a New Yorker staff writer. And ensure that article is also fact checked and everything looks good. So yeah, it's a little bit of everything. We know that even though we have a cadence of like one publication a week, like we take it so seriously when we curate a film and we collaborate with a filmmaker, be it a new first-time filmmaker or a student or an emerging filmmaker. Like making a doc is the hardest thing, and it takes so long. And for us, like we don't, even though it's like every single week, we really work on the amplification for each film depending on the thematic of it. And we know it's so important that it's out there and that the filmmaker we're working with is protected and has no liability. You're giving a huge global platform as POV, as New York Times, as a New Yorker, to someone who, is reporting something that's very different at times, or possibly dangerous for the character who's in the film, right? So overseeing that, I know I said a lot, but that's kind of like the week, a little bit of everything. At 9 a.m. it's one thing, at 9:05 is another.
Your break is when you actually get to look at new films.
Oh yes, I screen during lunch and maybe a few at night, sometimes.
What about you, Opal?
Oh, you're muted.
You're muted.
Sorry, it's not a Zoom if you're not muted. Can you remind me of the question again?
Oh, can you just tell us what your day is like? Like, how much are you looking at new submissions? What are you? Because I gather just from being an editor myself that a lot of it's not about new submissions. It's about keeping the trains rolling. Just what are you juggling during the day so that the students have an idea?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I'll note that my day is divided between my 2 roles, between both series, right, for POV and for POV shorts. So answering it for the short series, it depends on the point in the year. We put out way less than either the New Yorker or OpDocs do. We, on average, will do on the low end probably like 8 or 9 titles, on the high end 11 or 12 for the year. Like we aren't we don't have just those slots to be able to curate as much. So my work around the short series is divided into screening a lot of the cold submissions that we'll get. I'm not screening the cold ones, but the ones that come up through our committee screeners. screening submissions that come in from either alum or other film teams, or sales agents sometimes will send some in. We'll get those sort of like warm submits, I'll call those. And then in terms of films that are already signed and acquired, it's a fairly long process to get it from acquisition to ingested into the PBS system to go out to the stations. And so similar to the editorial processes that the New Yorker and OpDocs undertakes, we have PBS's standards and procedures, S&P we call them, who do a similar kind of process with all of the programming that we will submit to PBS for broadcasting. And so it's the same thing, they'll go through and do the due diligence on all the producers and the characters, and there's also a fairly strict fire line between editorial and finance, monies, right? PBS, there can't be any crossover between the two, and so there's also really strict scrutiny that is looked at between where the funding comes in from, and we do a lot of that at the front end, because that's the sort of thing that could kill a project, frankly, for PBS. If there is any money that comes in that has any level, even de minimis, of editorial input, it's a DOA. You either have to give the money back or it can't go on PBS. So, obviously we want to make sure that that is like a threshold question that's answered before we go into dealings with any of the titles. I'm also on the road quite a lot. My friends joke and call me "Where's Waldo?" Like we're at all of the main documentary forums. Of course, most of the team goes out to, the senior leadership goes out to Sundance, but Chris, I, and or Erica are at IDFA and Hot Docs and CPH. I think usually those three. Chris will sometimes do Vision du Real throughout the year to usually participate in the pitching forum. And I always appreciate forums that do that for short form. There aren't that many. But I know ADIC, which I'm going to next year, the Australian International Documentary Conference, and Docs by the Sea in Bali have done some pitch forums for shorts. Actually, also DocNYC has done it a couple of times. And that's always really interesting to see, short form projects being given that treatment. But, we're very much present and in the field to connect with filmmakers, early in the production stream, more for feature, but like I said, when it's available for shorts, I'm certainly there to connect with film teams. And then the production process, it's a little tedious, I'm not gonna lie. The PBS portion of things is it's just very, 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 very detailed, and a lot of that S&P process can be a little can be heavy lifting. But at the end of the day, it's really important that the work that we put out is in alignment with PBS's very rigorous standards, and so we do what we need to do to make sure everything is up to snuff. And then day to day, it's lots and lots of emails, and depending on the season, lots and lots of meetings. I feel like there's sort of like an ebb and flow of meetings. I'm kind of in the ebb portion of it, but there's usually like a big spike towards the end of the year. After we go to one of these markets, it's typically the case, right? We went to Camden, and there's all of these meetings, and we're going to IDFA next month. There'll be all of these meetings. But always emails. I got like top blocks of times in the calendar each day to make sure you stay on top of them, and I'm not good at it, but yeah.
And Lindsay, do you go to the op-ed daily meetings, or I don't know if they actually have those anymore, but
Yeah, the way that our department, we've changed a little bit, because we have the video, the text has a million little subsets, and then we have audio, video, text, and then like a huge graphics department. But so I'll go to that sometimes. But I would say that since I've been back at the Times, which has been maybe 2 or 3 months now, a lot of my work is done, and kind of what I love most about my job is development. So like coming up with stories or contributors or kind of, whatever the kernel is that's going to make, where it's somebody with a beautiful visual vocabulary or like a really creative way of making a point. That's what I've always loved about my job and what I'm really excited about continuing to double down on now. Or like an idea, like somebody that is saying something surprising. And that's the really cool thing about opinion video at the Times, is that we are in the Times's opinion department. And so it's all about as I said before, the main goal that we have is impact. And so that can happen in any number of ways. It could be through starting a conversation, that we could assess in terms of like the comments on the piece or the comments online about the piece. It could be changing a policy, getting the government to policymakers to see the piece and do something differently. But that's another way that that's when I look at development, I'm always thinking, what is special about this contributor or this argument or this way of making a point that might finally have that impact that we're looking for? And so I'm spending a ton of my time just like, I don't know, scrolling through my phone, like scrolling through people that send me something that they thought was interesting. The cool thing about looking for impact, like things that might have impact potential, is seeing what's already getting people to talk or to engage with a video or a piece of digital content. And how could I translate that into the New York Times? I'm not doing as much acquisitions now as I was when I was on OpDocs. They're mostly taking like a documentary project and working on it either from rough cut stage or taking a film that's already been at a festival. And then when I do come up with sort of something that I want to develop and put into production, then the whole production process is very similar to what you were discussing. It being on the New York Times, it does need to go through fact checking. It needs to go through all the standards that that Whitney is also very familiar with, that any other piece of content at the New York Times would go through. And so that's like the production and then also the promotion element of it is really important as well, because and that's also a huge value that we offer people when they come to the New York Times. Like, we're releasing this on the front page, on the New York Times homepage, and it doesn't stop there. It's about how can we get the piece in front of as many eyeballs, both kind of its usual suspects for an audience, and also the the people that are going to be surprised by the piece. Trying to think about how can we get people to really engage with it.
So we're gonna open it up to questions just after this one, because I want to make sure that the people who are doing the film ask all the questions. But like the big question is just like, what are you looking for? What is, you could talk, and we talked about this right over here, that you're going more to acquisitions and film festivals, and you're not taking as many submissions. But if you could sort of talk about, I'd like you to touch upon that, but all of you, if you can, and then, but just like, what is it that, like, are you looking? You talked about that. You're looking for impact, something to change. Are you looking for some emotional impact? Like, what do you have it down? You probably don't. You may not be able to answer this question, but like succinctly, because I imagine it's lots of things. But what are you looking for? And then in terms of like you were saying, it's quite hard to get submissions in because you're doing acquisitions. So can you talk a little bit about that too? Yeah. And then we're opening up to questions. So get your questions ready.
For sure. This question I get asked a lot, and I always tell people, like, just break the documentary rules of like what you think a documentary should look like, should be, etc. We always, obviously, we all learn the basics of like a really beautiful camera shot, this and that. But for us, I think when we get to see something that speaks to something that is, of importance to the world, editorially aligned with the New Yorker, what we cover, and the New Yorker specifically. We're the newest team within the magazine, but we all know a New Yorker article is very long, and our films are thankfully not that long, but it's always worth it. Like, it's always like you get to that twist and you get to the story arc, and it's like, whoa, okay, it was worth it. It took me 2 days to finish in the subway, but it was worth it, you know? Even I can't keep up with like the weekly subscriptions. But it's always that twist and that depth about, or like looking into something very specific, very tiny, and expanding into something you don't expect. But for us, what we basically look for are documentary shorts, unique approaches in a journalistic, editorial, and visual way, in a cinematic journalism way. And we do have buckets. For example, you know, thinking ahead. I love when someone thinks ahead in a pitch or submits something with like, I think this would be really good for 2024 because it aligns with extremism in the election. And, you know, it's also emblematic of something bigger that doesn't only have a lifespan of, you know, 2 to 3 months. So we definitely are very aligned with what the magazine is covering. So I always tell people, you know, look there and look at the way the stories are crafted at the New Yorker, because it surprises me all the time from the writers. And I think it's that feeling that we look for as well when we're watching these amazing films and submissions. So I would say, yeah, topical, thematically, editorially aligned with the New Yorker, what we're covering, and just experiment. Like, it doesn't have to be, people think that like doing a film is very expensive and doing it in school is very expensive. And the films that, one of my favorite films that we published this year, it's called It Feels Personal, and it's all shot in a laptop. And I'm sure Opal and Lindsay have seen really creative ways that are just very fresh and new, but surprising. And it's about this guy who just wanted to find his TikTok thief. So a guy repurposed his video on TikTok. It went viral. He was like, what the hell? Who took my video? And he takes you to this whole like journey, and there's a twist and the music, and it's hilarious, but also something like very, you know, editorially aligned to like what we live through right now, like what happens to us as human beings on the internet, you know? So
Did you get that at a festival, or was it a submission?
that was actually, we have an acquisition. So the New Yorker is part of Condé Nast, and there's this wonderful, wonderful woman her name is Sarah Lash, and she's our acquisition director. And she's amazing. She gets to go to more festivals in the same way that Opal does. I get to go sometimes, and our team gets to go as much as we can when we have a film, one of our original films in them, or just industry as well. But I'm mainly running our programming. But Sarah Lash brought it to us, I think out of IDFA or I don't remember if it was Vision to Real. I don't remember, but yes, out of a festival. And that's important because a lot of the films are submitted to us. A lot of people don't know, but we have a free submission portal. It's open year round, which is why we cannot keep up with it. And I'm going to fix it soon and tell people like seasonal, just because I also don't like the people submit things and we can't possibly get back to everybody. So we're fixing that. And we're fixing ways to find that. But if you just Google the New Yorker documentary submittables, you can submit your film, and you can share my email, and they can follow up with me about that. And then another way we also, you know, see new films and new forms of work are festivals. They're also a huge guide for us to really see what new, fresh, specifically like smaller festivals. Really, I love like a Big Sky, or even though it's not that small, it's an Oscar qualifying film festival, but it feels so that you get to go and you get to meet a new filmmaker who otherwise I wouldn't have met. And they have really great initiatives and festivals to really close that gap of what we call, you know, the lack of connection between the director and the subject matter. It's something I'm very passionate about, and our team is very passionate about. Really looking, if we're going to put out a film about a specific narrative of a specific community, we really look at the credits and who's the director here, and why is the director, if they're not from that community, why are they, you know, really gravitated to tell this story? And those conversations are very important, and festivals are really, really good place to meet filmmakers that otherwise you wouldn't have, or that they didn't know we had a submittable portal, for example. So, yeah, it's kind of like a mix of everything. And we do, you were talking about those hybrids of acquisitions that are, come to us at sometimes fine cut stage that you just say, oh my goodness, wow, this is amazing. But the filmmaker either doesn't have the funds to finish post-production also, right? Super expensive. Sound mix, super expensive. And that is the caliber that we ask in our series. So if like something comes to us in the rare cases as a fine cut and it just has the potential, but it doesn't have the funds to get there, we don't work as a studio. We don't have mucho dinero, you guys. We still work on, like, we still like depend on subscriptions in New Yorker. So please subscribe if you haven't. But we try to, I either, contact Pulitzer if I know if it's like aligned. We have editorially aligned nonprofit funders that are interested in helping new filmmakers as well. So going to festivals and meeting people about, how to support filmmakers when they need support is also super important. So yeah, those are kind of like our tiers, I would say.
That was amazing. Thank you. Opal?
Yep. All right, you. So it's interesting because since there is a parent series basically bearing the same name, I think there's certain expectations that the short series has borne since its inception. And what I would say is that I typically curate within somewhat what you would expect from the POV series, right? Which is intimately lensed, personal stories, giving a lens or giving a view on a larger societal issue. And sometimes that can be a historical issue or a social justice issue, a political issue. But that's typically sort of the trademark POV. What I would say Shorts does, though, is expand on that a little bit. Like, you'll more often than not see lighter fare stories on POV Shorts than on the Mothership series, right? And I'm still always looking for, even though it is, a cute film about a orphaned baby squirrel that gets taken in by this empty nester, right? That's my Dudouche from last season.
I love that film.
I'm also looking for something that has, like some sort of a like a social story to it, right? So for that film, the through line was, kind of the isolation that many of us were feeling in the wake of the pandemic, and that being aligned with the isolation that empty nesters often feel. So we also did a short on an outdoor gym in Ukraine, and of course we released that probably like 3 years ago. I think that was my first season. And so, since the Russian aggressions in Ukraine, that was something that, folks are able to look at and have a little bit of a different lens on that region, So I'm very much curating with what's expected, and I hate to use the word, for some folks it's a 4-letter word, of the brand, but you want to not be taking too far of a departure, but just sort of expanding the boundaries of that, if that makes any sense. A broader array of the types of stories that would touch on more substantive fare. That said, in terms of practicalities, like I said, we don't program as many titles as OpDocs and the New Yorker do. So, typically the sweet spot for run length for us is between 12 and 15 minutes. We'll program the odd, over 20-minute title, and every once in a blue moon, over 30-minute title. The challenge there being, if a title is over 20 minutes, we only have a 24-minute slot for our 30-minute broadcast, half hour, and then 52 minutes for a broadcast hour, which is as much as POV Shorts has ever gotten. So if we're gonna program like a 30+ minute film, we've got to get that approval of the broadcast hour from PBS, and then also find, complementary title or titles to pair with it. And I'm looking for films that are gonna just be strong, make a strong sort of statement and impact in the space. I think as a series, we're always looking for work that, draws eyeballs and that is going to be impactful, but also work that, is gonna get broader industry attention. So, that is a lot of the work of being in the field and making sure that you're at the festivals that are inviting and awarding, more titles that would align with that. But impact, I also want to echo what Lindsay was saying. Impact is an important part of what the POV series does, both for feature length and for short form. And I'm proud that since I've taken the helm over our engagement department, who is our impact division in POV, have committed to giving impact support to a selection of each season's POV shorts. And so one of the things that I'm constantly telling to filmmakers when I'm in the field and looking to sign titles is that we're a great partner in that work, if that's what you want to have happen with your short. All POVs and then any POV shorts that are selected for impact support receive educational guidelines. They're drafted by our manager of education in conjunction with an educator that she'll hire for each title. And this is work that's done collaboratively with the film teams. So it turns the film into a text, and it's a really special thing, I think, for any film to have, but particularly for a short, because it's not oftentimes that you're going to be given that sort of a treatment for short form work, right? Like it's typically, I think, expected that just the film will speak for itself. So this is something that's also very much in line with PBS's ethos around education, and it's a real privilege to be able to offer it to a selection of short films each year, and I think it makes us a great partner for those films that really seek to have impact.
Thank you. Lindsay, but I want to just, James, we'll walk around. Okay. So I guess after Lindsay's done, just raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone around for a question. And Lindsay, you sort of talked about this already somewhat with impact.
Yeah. I mean, I just am really both impact and then also just films that are surprising. So, the kind of film that everybody's like lining up to climb Mount Everest, like who's found like the more interesting mountain over in the corner and is going to like do something that we haven't seen before. That's the kind of film that I'm looking for, is like what's going to challenge me, especially because like we see so many rightfully films about basically, if it's a topic that's kind of already on our front page from the newsroom, then we're probably going to take like one or two of the most striking films on that topic, and it's like, so you have to kind of find a way into making it that memorable, surprising film, or a film on a topic with a character or with an approach that we've never seen before, and those are the two ways in for us, I'd say.
And with now in your role in Opinion Video, you were saying that you take more submissions than you would have in OpDocs, because OpDoc was more acquisition?
Me particularly, no. OpDocs is all different ways. Basically, so Opinion Video, OpDocs is part of Opinion Video. Opinion Video is a little newsier, a little more video oriented. OpDocs, of course, is short documentaries that are more festival oriented. They can kind of tell their story in a verite, observational way. But they're just more cinematic and festival oriented. And there are submission portals for both. You can just find them by Googling. In both cases, you can pitch your idea through our submissions portal, and it will certainly get reviewed. It may not. We try to respond to everything. We're not always able to. And so in both cases, like in OpDocs, you could certainly pitch a film for sheer acquisition. We will acquire films from directly from festivals all the time. In Up Video, it's going to be more, I mean, anything is possible, but I would say you should come to us with an idea and an approach and examples of the kind of video that you have in mind, and we can kind of go from there and figure out how to make it happen.
Thank you. So raise your hand if you have a question. Marcia.
Can you talk to us about what a pitch would look like? Can you tell us what a pitch would look like? What do you want it to say? Print, pitch, oral? Yeah.
For me, representative footage is really, really helpful, whether it's something that you've made before that's a stylistic indicator of what you can actually achieve in the past. Like, I've actually had the best luck with filmmakers that way, where, say I would say our Oscar winner got produced this way, where we acquired a film directly, because it was already done, from Big Sky, a really great festival. And I met the filmmaker, I liked him, I thought he had good vision, great style, and so we started brainstorming, what did we like about this film? And the answer was, it was about a person on the cusp of great success, on the cusp of fame, but fell just short. And that film was about a white man seeking his dreams. And we were like, well, how about you expand this out to people who are held back from great success for other reasons, such as structural reasons, like whether it was gender or race or another element of their background. And from there wound up creating The Queen of Basketball, out of a series of films of people cast with that in mind. But so in that way, what made us do it was that I loved his style. I loved his, particularly his facility with archival, and the way that he was able to recreate past backstories through just this very terrific archival storytelling. And so that's why I say that an example of what you've done in the past and where you can show me especially from a filmmaking perspective, what you're capable of. I really love to come in and kind of help with story and kind of delivery. And so I think in that way, it can be a good match.
For us, I think it really has been, we used to get these beautiful pitch decks, and I always tell people those are take a long time to make. They might be beautiful and everything, but I think for us it's just simple line, what's your log line? What's your approach? What's your visual inspiration for it? And how do you envision, what's your story arc? What is that surprising angle? How do you envision, this story arc surprise in your film to come about? Because sometimes we all have those amazing stories. And documentary specifically is very challenging because most of the time it's things that already happened, right? It's rare, that, you're in the moment with an evolving storyline, right, that you're following for a long time. But there's so many creative ways to create your story arc within your pre-production plan or your idea. And just good pre-pro in the doc side, in the doc sense, goes a long way. Just ideas of, if you don't have experience in shooting or in producing, just your top 5 dream cinematic approaches or inspiration for what this would look like, right? Is it an animation? Is it verite? Just, story arc, synopsis, logline, and visual approach. And what funds and budget are you looking for? And don't be afraid to ask for what you actually think this is going to cost you, including your time. And I think most people, at least for us, we're very transparent. This is amazing. We don't have the resources right now, or we actually will have the resources, or we're interested for next year. But always put an honest budget. I think I've seen a lot of people, come in with a budget that's just not really realistic for the level of the project, and then it's not completed, right? Because both parties agreed to a specific budget. So always be honest with how much you think it's going to cost, and always, always, always include your time for the production.
We have lots of Opal, we do want to hear from you on this question too. But if there's anything different,
honestly, they covered all of it. Like we just did our first call for co-production fund that we did alongside Chicken and Egg, and that, I mean, everything that that Melissa and Lindsay just mentioned was I co-signed it all. But I just want to highlight and underline any representative footage that you can have, either of the current project that you're pitching or work you've done before, is helpful. The budget, super, super important, and then, you know, just a very fresh and as visually representative take as you can of the work. That's all that stood out to us.
thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you for sharing this information. I have a question about the audience. I think audience, like, is always important while pitching, but are you looking, like, do you prefer like mainstream or like more journalistic? For example, like the documentary target broader audience, or there are some documentary films that kind of target like niche audience? Do you think that's like, do you have preference on that, or do you think if the story itself, the idea is like standing out, then it's gonna be fine?
Did you hear that question, Opal? Okay. Do you want to go first, since we sort of cut you short a little bit?
Sure. No, I think audience is important. I like to think of it as something that you know, we and the film team can kind of work in conjunction with each other. Like, I'm not thinking about audience when I'm making acquisitions. You know, maybe it's a bit of a seat of privilege. You know, programming for a public television audience. So the audience is pretty much, I feel like, for the most part, we feel like we've captured the audience that we're going to have. You know, I mean, if I'm being honest. So it's more, I think, to the extent that I've had those kind of discussions with film teams, it's more a bit about like how we can work with you in terms of like targeted marketing or targeted promotions, or, you know, something we've been doing new this season is bringing POV shorts into communities, and we've done like sneak peeks of the season, both in community screenings and then also in festival screenings. You know, doing development that way. But in terms of, at least for my work, in terms of selecting a title, it's not really something where I'm thinking like, oh, this will draw in this kind of audience or that kind of audience.
If you have questions, raise your hand so we can get the microphone around. Anything you guys want to add to that? Or?
I'll just add that I think it's to your point, Opal. I think I think half of my audience and the New Yorker audience is the ones that are very consistent, and you know that they're going to like a specific thematic. But like, I would say half of it's those films that, oh my gosh, I could get a new audience, you know, with this film. Something that our audience is surprised by, and they want to, you know, they're very intrigued. So again, new, experimental, but still journalistic in a way. Like, for example, recently I saw one of my favorite shorts. It's called The Script, and Opal knows which one. It's wonderful. It's a documentary. It's a docufiction short, and it is about two storylines of transgender patients and their experience going to the doctor for the first time and wanting to transition, and how traumatic the U.S. medical system is for some trans folks across the U.S., and that experience just really, really shapes your transition. But they do it as this movie, and the character is there, and it's scripted, right? But it's based on real experiences, and the lighting is stunning. And then you meet the real character, and that's like, ooh, that's a, you know, wow, what a giveaway. It's something that you're never gonna see a half fiction, half real article like in the New York Times or the New Yorker, but that's the beauty of like film, right? So I wasn't thinking about the audience there, but I am thinking about the audience come 2024, for example, like the election, public duty, impact in that sense, but you just have to balance. So don't be afraid to think outside the box. But again, centered to an editorial theme that is very important, which right now is trans rights in the US and around the world.
Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, is it
Since
okay?
we're running out of time, I just want to make sure we get to as many questions as possible.
I'm so sorry. Is it okay if I ask a question that's not related to like pitches or film festivals? Like a specific
Go ahead.
question? Okay, so I wanted to ask you a question specifically, Melissa, because I'm from Chula Vista in San Diego, and the women who taught me everything I know about journalism pretty much all were from Tijuana, worked for Telemundo, and in after-school programs they taught me. I love Tijuana. I've been there all the time since I was little. I really want to make my journalistic goal about like sort of what you talked about, bridging this relationship, showing the beauty and stuff. So what advice would you give to a young person who wants to break the mold of all of this bad news of there's a wall and there's Trump and there's all this stuff and shine through and show that beauty?
Go back to Chula. Spend more time there. Go back there as much as we can. I think for me, coming to New York was like, wow. You know, like it's so different. It's so different, and you experience here is gonna learn so much. But like, going back to TJ, going back to Chula Vista, and you're here. I assume you're a student.
Yeah.
Like you're doing it. Like don't forget that side, because I think I never found when I was at Now This, I was doing immigration, but then ironically, like Trump ran, and they wanted me to do like immigrations about Tijuana without me being in Tijuana. And with the internet right now, everybody's just like, okay, you could figure it out from everywhere. But no, you have a home in Chula Vista. You have people to stay. I was just like, just let me go home and let me talk to my people without like having to be here in the office in New York. And they did. And I would say like there's always a balance right now with remote. Like spend more time there and going back to those roots as much as we can, because the internet is great, but like there's really nothing like going and you cross the border and you're standing up and there's like along with so many people like TSA but like times 10 there. Like I've met so many interesting stories just like standing there that I would never like come across like Instagram or anything. So go back there and yeah, that's so cool. You're from Chula Vista.
Yeah.
I guess can you just pass it over there to the, yeah.
So my question is more like technical. So after the pitch, what would the procedure be like? Would you have an expected delivery date for our project or story we are working for? And also for the edit, like as producer and director, will I hold my final say on the edit? Or we need to like, in the storyline telling? And also like New Yorker or POV shots, are you guys looking for the screening rights or the copyright, or is case by case, depending on the funding you're giving to us?
Yeah. Opal, some of that was directed to you. Do you want to take it? And then maybe.
Yeah, just to be clear that I heard you're asking about what level of rights we're asking for.
And does the rights, and does the director have final say on the film? And then what was the first part?
Like, do you have a specific timeline for the production? Like, if I work in a story that might take 2 or 3 years, or I better send me a story that could be finished by this year?
Like a hard deadline.
Yeah, if you accept it, is there like what kind of deadlines are you asking for? What kind of rights are you giving? And then does that director have final say?
Okay. So you keep your copyright. We only take license for U.S. territory, and the only portion of that license that is exclusive is for television broadcast. So you can also stream with someone else. Our streaming rights are not exclusive. They're for 4 years, and they're just for the U.S. territory. In terms of final say, yeah, we typically will need to do a cut down of films for, to make it fit the broadcast half hour, like I mentioned earlier. But that's always done in conjunction with the film team, and we also prefer that any cut downs be filmmaker directed, meaning, you know, we'll just say the time that we need and you do the edits that you want and, you know, give it to us when you're ready. And then in terms of production timeline, so it's interesting you should ask. We have been experimenting the last couple of years with how we want to kind of shift things. We've typically had this broadcast paradigm for production, which didn't really serve us well. So then this year we moved to 2 deliveries to PBS, where we, you know, released the first half of the season in July and the second half in November. And I think next year we're going to go on to like a rolling basis where we're just going to release a certain amount of titles throughout the year, like quarterly. We've just been trying to experiment with the system's channels, then the different stations, what serves them well, because the short series is released to stations differently than the main series. They are what we call soft fed. So once they're made available to the stations, it's up to the station programmers to determine which day and time that they want to, you know, put the programming into their schedules. So as long as we give them, you know, a nice long runway of information about the new upcoming episodes, you know, they have all that they need, and then it's up to them to plug it in where they want. And so we think that's actually going to yield the best carriage overall, to just give them sort of a rolling refreshing of new POV Shorts titles, as opposed to doing, you know, the same kind of paradigm that we do for the main series, which is hard fed, and there's a determined, you know, Monday nights at 10 p.m. is where you can find POV. So the production schedule is going to shift, basically, is my long way of saying. You know, we typically need about 3.5 months out from delivery to PBS to start the process of deliverables and packaging. So that's what I would say. Going into next year, we're going to start that process as soon as we sign the titles. So it'll be 3.5 months from signing until delivery.
Thank you. So I think we have time for one more question. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Should I go? Okay. My question is for Lindsay. So I'm really excited to see how short form docs are gaining so much traction and so much popularity recently. I'm curious if you have any thoughts as to why they're doing so well and what kind of elements make them successful. And also, do you ever get pitches that you have to turn down because they're just not sustainable to fit into a short doc and they're better for long form, and how do you handle that conversation?
I mean, those are great questions. I have never had personally, because I mean, people just pitch us shorts, and so usually by the time they're pitching us, again, a really successful pitch is going to be something where we've seen a little bit's been shot in the past, and then we can really envision what the arc of the story is going to be, and it can often be a short film. It's rare that we're like, oh, this needs to be longer. Usually we're like, this needs to be shorter, you know, as any editor does, for better and for worse. But yeah, so usually but also with OpDocs, one thing that people have done in the past, this hasn't happened as much recently, but when we started, you know, part of the incentive for filmmakers to work with us was to say, you can do this short, and then as a proof of concept, you can publish on the New York Times. If you achieve that impact that you're looking for, you know, through maybe like you've done a short profile of one character and what they are showing in their story is so powerful that you can bring that to a funder and say, look at how popular this was, we need more. And that can work, where you take the short and you turn it into something bigger. In fact, I just worked with a OpDoc filmmaker to make something on Israel where we can absolutely envision like the longer piece as opposed to the quick turn that needed to happen because of the news. So that's the first question. The second question is amazing. I would say that OpDocs are so popular. I mean, that short documentaries are so popular because there's so much content out there. Like people certainly want long, rich, and gross storytelling, but there's a lot that can be achieved, and even more room for, I think, creative storytelling, and sort of those beautiful, almost like less in depth, less almost the short docs don't get weighed down. They can be very to the point. They can really concisely explain a point of view and show a problem if that's what they're trying to do, and kind of leave it to the audience to connect the dots about what needs to happen next. And I just think there's a lot more power in shorts than people originally when documentary was kind of first taking off, really gave them credit for. I mean, obviously the other thing that's really led to the rise of short docs is mobile platforms and mobile apps. It's just a lot easier to watch them now and to access them. And so, I think there's a lot less of a barrier to entry to creating a short doc. You need less money, and anybody, not just docs, but short video content, anybody can do it. I remember when we first started OpDocs, we had people sending us films they shot on their phones. And that's even more possible now. And so I think just that broad, it's just very democratically available in a way that doing a feature doc is much more involved. So I just think we're seeing really cool, creative stuff there.
Thank you, Opal. Thank you, Lindsay and Melissa. If you can stay around for a little bit, maybe I'm sure that some students might want to ask you some questions, but if you have to go, please go. But thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Opal.
See you guys. Sorry, I couldn't be there.